The numbers on my phone would not stay still. I read them 3 times, back pressed against a marble pillar in the Gilded Crown Casino, the noise of the room reduced to a distant blur. $50 million. It was 13 minutes past 2 in the morning. I had been mopping champagne from a baccarat table when the lottery alert arrived. My hands were still wet from the cloth. My name is Rosa Ortiz. I am 31 years old and have worked nights at the Gilded Crown for 6 years, cleaning, clearing, invisible to every guest who passes through. I share a flat on Fenwick Road with my brother Theo. Our mother has been ill for nearly 2 years, and the medical bills on our kitchen counter never get smaller, no matter how many extra shifts I take. That ticket, bought at the staff kiosk during my unpaid meal break because Theo had begged me, was supposed to change absolutely everything. My colleague Patrice screamed so loudly that security came running. Within minutes, half the floor staff had gathered round. I was crying and laughing at once. Then the crowd parted. Mr. Desmond Vale, Chief Executive Officer of the Gilded Crown Group, walked straight through it, took the ticket from my fingers, and said coldly, "You purchased this during your shift. Legally, it belongs to this company." Security was at my side before I could speak. If your heart is already racing, subscribe right now and leave a comment below, because what comes next will leave you absolutely speechless. The private executive lounge on the 34th floor looked nothing like the building below it. Soft lighting, cream leather chairs, art on the walls whose value I could not estimate. I was placed in one of those chairs without being asked whether I wished to sit. Within 20 minutes, 3 members of the casino's public relations team had appeared and arranged themselves around me like a production crew. A glass of champagne was pressed into my hand. A woman whose name I was never given touched up my makeup without asking. Another adjusted my collar and murmured that I should look naturally emotional for the camera set up near the window before I had even arrived. They were not celebrating with me. They were constructing a scene they intended to own. Then the lawyers came. A man in a gray suit slid a document across the coffee table without a proper introduction. He explained, in a tone designed to sound reassuring, that the paperwork was a temporary protective transfer of the prize for legal purposes, a financial safety net, he called it, using that phrase twice. It sounded less convincing the second time. I read every line slowly. This appeared to surprise them. On the 3rd page, buried beneath a dense paragraph of contractual language, I found a sentence at the end of Clause 7. For words separated from the rest by a semicolon, irreversible ownership review pending. I looked up. Every face in the room was carefully, deliberately neutral. I put the pen down and did not sign. By the time I reached home, dawn was pressing through the curtains. Theo was asleep on the sofa with his phone balanced on his chest. I sat on the floor beside him and did not wake him. The right words did not matter, because before I had even taken my work shoes off, the Gilded Crown Group had already decided which story the world would hear. Their statement was released before 8 in the morning. It implied, without stating it directly, that I had used company-owned equipment and company time to purchase the ticket. It mentioned that all kiosk facilities within the resort were group property. It said nothing about my meal break. It said nothing true. By mid-morning, the comments beneath the news articles had turned savage. Strangers called me greedy, ungrateful, dishonest. Former colleagues who had stood beside me the previous night had found their own version of events. One said I had always been difficult. Another said I had no right to money earned on someone else's clock. It was Theo who finally broke through the numbness. He set his phone down, looked at me, and asked in a voice so small I had to lean forward, "Rosa, are we going to lose everything again? Like after Papa died?" I pressed my hand over my mouth and closed my eyes. I had promised our mother, on the day she first went into hospital, that I would not let that happen. Standing in my work uniform at 8 in the morning, I was beginning to understand how fragile that promise was. 2 days later I received a formal request to attend a meeting at the Gilded Crown. I was shown into a small, windowless room on the 2nd floor and offered nothing. The head of human resources, a composed woman named Janet Moss, placed my employment contract on the table between us with the deliberate manner of someone who had done this many times before. She opened it to a marked page and read aloud from a clause concerning income opportunities generated during paid working hours. Her interpretation, delivered without hesitation, was that any earnings arising from actions taken while clocked in belonged to the company. The walls of the room pressed inward as she spoke. She continued, but I had already stopped hearing her words. I was thinking about the kiosk. About the timestamp on my phone from when I had clocked out for my unpaid break that night. I asked to see the full contract. She hesitated, just long enough for me to notice, then slid it across the table. I read every page. It took a long time and she did not rush me. On page 86, in the third paragraph, I found a clause covering purchases made during non-paid employee intervals. Its meaning was unmistakable. Actions taken during unpaid rest periods were explicitly excluded from any company ownership claim. I had bought that ticket during my break. The contract confirmed it. As I collected my coat to leave, a payroll clerk in the corridor pressed her shoulder briefly against mine and whispered, "They were hoping you'd never read page 86. I could not yet afford a legal team, but I had the contract page photographed and my own clear memory of the night. What I needed was evidence showing the kiosk transaction had taken place during my break, not during paid hours. The answer arrived from an unexpected direction. A woman named Cora worked nights in the casino's information technology monitoring room, one floor below the security suite. We had exchanged fewer than 20 words across the 2 years we had both worked at the Gilded Crown. But 2 mornings after my meeting with Janet Moss, she knocked at my locker room door and handed me a folded note without speaking. I met her in the staff car park at 6 in the morning. She told me in a quiet, careful voice that the casino's internal cameras had recorded everything on the night I won. The corridor footage near the rear entrance showed me clocking out at 11:47, reaching the kiosk at 11:51, completing the purchase at 11:53, and clocking back in at 12:04. I had been on an unpaid break for every second of it. Cora had noted the file reference down. We agreed to meet the following morning to copy the footage properly. But when I stood beside her the next day and watched her pull the file up on screen, the window turned black in front of us. The timestamp vanished. The footage had been deleted remotely while we watched. Cora sat very still. "Someone inside this building just wiped it," she said. While we were looking at it. The day after the footage disappeared, I was summoned back to the executive floor. No cameras this time and no public relations staff. Only Mr. Desmond Vale was behind a desk the size of a door, and 2 chairs arranged so that only one held any authority. He gestured at the other. I sat. He began by speaking about my father. He did it casually, mentioning that Marco Ortiz had worked at the Gilded Crown as a maintenance contractor for several years before his death, that he had been a capable man. That towards the end of his time there, he had made certain people considerably uncomfortable. The phrasing was light. The meaning underneath it was not. He let it sit between us. Then he leaned forward and said that families carried things in both directions, legacies of goodwill and legacies of unfinished business. I kept my voice level. My father did not owe anyone anything. He said nothing in return. He simply changed his expression, the way people do when they have already said enough and know it. What he did not see was what had sharpened inside me the moment he said my father's name. My private employment records would not have mentioned Marco Ortiz unless someone had searched for it deliberately. He had gone looking through records about my family, and had just told me so without meaning to. I wrote down every word of that conversation the moment I reached the street. I noted the time and kept the note carefully. Over the following 3 days, I contacted 7 solicitors and 1 specialist employment lawyer. Every single one declined the case before I had finished explaining it. The calls were polite, brief, and identical in a way that suggested they had all received the same quiet signal from the same direction. One receptionist told me her firm had other obligations, creating a conflict of interest. She could not say more. The 6th lawyer was less careful. He was older, semi-retired, with nothing left to lose. He told me plainly that the Gilded Crown Group had spent years ensuring that legal professionals in this city understood the cost of opposing them. They did not always win in court. They did not need to. What they had mastered was making the process long enough and expensive enough that most people surrendered before a judge ever read a single page. I ended the call and sat on the edge of the bath with the light off. Then my phone rang from a number I did not recognize. The woman who answered introduced herself as Evelyn Cho, a barrister specializing in employment law and civil rights litigation. She said she had been following the coverage of my case with considerable interest for 4 days. "Miss Ortiz," she said, her voice measured and entirely unhurried, "I believe your chief executive officer committed 3 separate legal violations during his television interview this morning. I would like to represent you, if you will allow it." I turned the bathroom light back on. I had not watched the television interview. I was sitting in Evelyn Cho's consulting room on the 12th floor of a building on Cornhill Street, going through my employment contract section by section, when her assistant slid a tablet across the desk and pressed play. Mr. Desmond Vale stood on a stage before what appeared to be a gathered audience of casino employees. The backdrop was designed to look humble: shirt sleeves, a plain microphone stand, no visible logos. He spoke about fairness. About looking after the people in your building. About rules applying equally to everyone regardless of position. The audience applauded in the way audiences do when the applause has been arranged beforehand. Then a journalist asked a direct question about the surveillance footage from the night of my win. Whether it had been reviewed. Who had authorized the review? In the space of one poorly judged answer, Mr. Vale confirmed that he had personally examined the full camera record from that evening, including footage accessed through the resort's restricted internal archive. Evelyn stopped the video. She looked at me for a moment without speaking. Then she picked up her pen and drew a single line beneath a phrase in her legal pad. "The restricted internal archive," she said quietly, "can only be accessed with a senior executive override code. He has just told a room full of journalists, and a live camera, that he personally authorized access to footage already designated as material evidence in an active legal case." She drew a second line. "That is not an oversight. That is a criminal admission." 2 mornings after Evelyn filed her initial motion, I returned to the Gilded Crown to collect the last of my belongings. I had barely reached the car park when a small, deliberate figure fell into step beside me. Her name was Ruth Baxter. She had worked at the Gilded Crown for 19 years, longer than anyone else on the floor teams, and in all that time I had never once seen her involve herself in gossip. She spoke without turning her head towards me. "This is not the first time," she said. "Not exactly this. But the same shape of it. Someone earns something, or wins something, or simply has something the building decides it wants. And then the same mechanism starts." She told me about a floor supervisor pressured for weeks to sign documents relating to a family inheritance, about a maintenance worker who accepted a settlement after a workplace injury and left the city within a month of signing, with no forwarding address and no follow-up. Then Ruth reached into her coat pocket and pressed a folded newspaper clipping into my hand. The paper had gone soft with age. The headline read, "Employee Files Suit Against Crown Resort Group." Below it was a photograph of a woman I did not recognize. The article was 9 years old. I spent that evening searching every archive I could find for an outcome, for a follow-up, for any record of what had happened to her. There was nothing. Not a single line. The message came on a private number at 10:30 on a Thursday evening. It knew details about my case that had not been made public, the date of Evelyn's filing, the specific clause in my contract, and the name of the payroll clerk who had spoken to me in the corridor. The sender said they were sorry for what was happening to me. They said they recognized how it was being managed because they had grown up watching it being managed. They said their father always became most dangerous when he ran out of time. They asked if we could speak privately. I showed the message to Evelyn the following morning. She read it twice and said I should reply. I called the number that afternoon. The man who answered introduced himself as Callum Vale, Mr. Desmond Vale's son, estranged from his father for 3 years and living abroad. He had seen the national coverage and recognized the pattern at once, the public narrative shaped around the other person's greed, the manufactured sympathy, the settlement offered while the legal case was still open. He had watched his father use this exact approach before. on business partners, on members of their own family. What has changed, Callum said carefully, is that he has never been this desperate. When he manages things this personally, it means he has no room left. He paused. He is not negotiating from strength, Miss Ortiz. He is fighting because he is already out of road. That was the first night I slept more than 3 hours. Evelyn had been working quietly on the financial structure of the Gilded Crown Group since the day she took my case. She presented what she had found on a Tuesday afternoon, with rain coming sideways at the window of her office on Cornhill Street. The Gilded Crown Group was insolvent in everything except its public presentation. The flagship casino, the building I had cleaned for 6 years, with its marble columns and manufactured elegance, was carrying debt across 4 separate holding companies totaling nearly $2 billion. 3 of those debt instruments were approaching repayment deadlines within 6 weeks. The 4th had technically expired already. 2 major lenders had issued private notices of concern, and a 3rd had reportedly consulted legal advisors about accelerated repayment. None of this had appeared in any public filing. The group's published accounts presented a business that was uncomfortable but fundamentally sound. The reality, Evelyn said, placing a bound set of documents between us, was considerably different. I sat with that for a long time. Mr. Vale had not taken my ticket as a matter of company principle. He had taken it because $50 million was precisely the size of the gap between what the Gilded Crown presented to the world and what it actually was. He had looked at the woman mopping his casino floor and seen a solution to a problem years in the making. He had not, at any point, considered that the woman mopping his floor had already read page 86. 3 weeks after Evelyn submitted the formal claim, the Gilded Crown Group made its first offer. The letter arrived through their legal representatives and set out a private settlement worth $3 million. I had 48 hours to accept, waive all current and future legal claims, and sign a permanent non-disclosure agreement preventing me from ever discussing the case, the company, or any of its employees. A joint public statement would describe the resolution as amicable. $3 million. More than I had ever had. More than I had imagined accumulating across decades of careful living. I could clear my mother's medical debt that same afternoon. I could give Theo the future he deserved. I could stop waking at 3 a.m. to look at a bank account I already knew by heart. I held the letter for a long time before taking it to Evelyn. She read it, then said, "Before you decide anything, there is something you need to see." Cora had not stopped working since the night the footage was deleted. What she brought to Evelyn's office that afternoon was metadata extracted from the settlement document itself, embedded file properties from the digital version their legal team had transmitted. The document had been created 4 months before I won that lottery. The original file name referenced an employee case number that did not yet exist when the document was first prepared. They had built a settlement framework for a situation that had not yet occurred. They had been planning for exactly this, long before I ever stepped near that kiosk. On the 41st day after I won, an investigative journalist named Phoebe Strand published an article in the National Digital Press. The headline was precise and measured. The content was neither. Phoebe had obtained a collection of internal emails exchanged between senior executives at the Gilded Crown Group over 7 weeks prior to my win. The emails did not concern company policy. They concerned me specifically. My name appeared in 6 separate messages. My employment record, which I had never consented to share, was quoted directly in one of them. A message from the group's chief financial officer to Mr. Vale read, "If the right type of incident produces a significant prize claim from a floor-level employee, we move to the standard recovery sequence." The article was online before 9 a.m. By midday, the comment sections had reversed entirely. People who had spent 3 weeks calling me greedy were now sharing those emails alongside photographs of my mother's hospital correspondence that I had never released. Former employees of the Gilded Crown posted their own accounts anonymously, settlement documents, unexplained dismissals, withdrawn bonuses. One account described a situation almost identical to mine from 7 years prior, ending with a non-disclosure agreement and a one-way move out of the city. When I walked into Hartfield Court for the preliminary hearing the following morning, I noticed something I had not seen on Mr. Vale's face before. Not composure. Not authority. Uncertainty, the kind that forms when a person realizes they are standing on ground that is no longer familiar. The hearing was adjourned after 40 minutes. The lottery ticket, the original physical ticket, logged into the court's secured evidence facility 3 weeks earlier, had disappeared overnight. The Gilded Crown's legal team filed a procedural application before the afternoon session. Their argument was precise: with the physical ticket unavailable, the question of lawful ownership could not, they submitted, be properly determined. Their barrister used the word unfortunate 4 times in 11 minutes. I walked back to Evelyn's office feeling the way you feel when you have done everything correctly and watched it be undone regardless. Then Evelyn's phone rang. It was Ruth Baxter. Ruth told us, in her unhurried way, that on the night I won she had been the last housekeeping staff member to leave the casino floor. She had stood at the back of the crowd, watched Mr. Vale take the ticket from my hand, and before security cleared the floor, she had done one quiet thing. She had taken her mobile phone from her apron pocket and photographed both sides of the ticket from roughly 2 meters away. The photographs were time-stamped from that night. They showed the ticket number, the draw date, and the prize amount in full. Both images had been automatically backed up to a remote cloud storage account within minutes, completely untouched ever since. Ruth had said nothing until now because she had wanted to be certain I was the sort of person who would use it properly. I believe you are, she told Evelyn. So there you are. Callum Vale had been careful and measured in our first conversation. In our second meeting, 3 weeks into the hearing process, he was not. He met Evelyn and me at a quiet cafe on a side street in the north of the city, arriving 10 minutes early and choosing a table at the back with his coat still on. He ordered nothing. He told us that his father had despised Marco Ortiz for the better part of a decade. My father had worked at the Gilded Crown as a maintenance contractor from the time I was 12 until I was 18. In his final 2 years there, he discovered, through routine access to billing records, a systematic pattern of financial misreporting. Invoices for work that had never taken place. Payments to subcontractors that did not exist. Amounts that reappeared in entirely different budget categories in the official accounts. He reported it internally. Nothing happened. He asked further questions. He was released from his contract. Then, Callum said, his father ensured Marco Ortiz could not find regular work at any major hospitality venue in the city again. My father had died of a cardiac event at 52. He spent his last 4 years taking whatever work came, never explaining why the steady contracts had stopped. He said nothing to me. He said nothing to our mother. I sat with my hands flat on the table and breathed steadily for a long time before I trusted myself to speak. This had never been only about the ticket. The same day Callum spoke to us, Evelyn received a formal response from the State Lottery Commission. She had submitted a request for their intervention 3 weeks earlier, citing documented evidence of prize ownership being disputed under duress. The commission had taken its time. When their senior regulatory officer finally replied, the letter ran to 4 pages, but the part that mattered occupied a single paragraph on page 2. State lottery prizes in physical ticket format, the document stated, were the legal property of the individual in possession of the ticket at the time of presentation, unless the holder could be demonstrated, through formal legal proceedings, to have obtained the ticket through theft, fraud, or coercion. The burden of proof in any such claim rested entirely with the challenging party, not with the holder. Furthermore, and this was the sentence Evelyn underlined in 2 different colors, any documented attempt to intimidate or coerce a prize winner into surrendering their winnings voluntarily constituted grounds for an automatic referral to the Commission's Fraud and Compliance Division. That division operated independently of the civil courts and carried its own investigative powers. Evelyn placed the letter on the desk. They cannot claim this ticket through employment law, she said. They never could. The only question was whether they could frighten you into surrendering it before you discovered that. She added the document to the file. The commission is now formally watching this case. That changes what Mr. Vale is permitted to do next. I felt something loosen across my shoulders that I had been carrying for nearly 7 weeks. The emergency shareholders meeting of the Gilded Crown Group was held on a Thursday, behind closed doors. I know what took place inside because Callum Vale, who held a minority shareholding inherited from his mother, was present throughout. The atmosphere, he told me afterwards, was unlike any board meeting he had attended before. Phoebe Strand's article had been cited in 3 national newspapers and 2 international financial publications. 2 institutional investors had engaged their own legal representatives. 1 non-executive director had contacted the group's insurers without informing the rest of the board. The meeting did not open with financial reporting. It opened with a single question from an independent director, addressed directly to Mr. Vale. Had he personally authorized the deletion of surveillance footage designated as material evidence in an active legal case? He did not answer it directly. Not once, across 3 separate occasions the question was put to him. The group's chief financial officer had brought printed copies of every executive email relating to my case, unredacted, 1 copy per seat. The emails contained the line about the standard recovery sequence. They contained a message from Mr. Vale himself, sent 6 days after my win, that read, "This situation must be resolved before the refinancing closes." The room read those emails in silence. By the end of the session, 3 directors had formally declared they could not continue in their roles while the current leadership question remained unresolved. A 4th submitted his written resignation before leaving the building. Callum sent me a message that evening. For words, he has no room. 18. The call came through Evelyn's office on a Wednesday evening at just past 8. It was from Mr. Vale's personal assistant, asking whether I would be willing to meet her employer privately, not at the Gilded Crown, not at any official premises, but at a restaurant on the upper floors of a building on the western edge of the city called the 17th. Evelyn strongly advised against attending without legal support. I went with a recording device and her number was active on my phone. She waited in the car park below. Mr. Desmond Vale was already seated when I arrived. The table had been set for 2. Floor-to-ceiling windows behind him showed the city in its entirety, lights spreading east across the flatlands as far as I could see, all the way to where I imagined Fenwick Road sat somewhere in the dark. He had ordered wine. I did not touch mine. He spoke for several minutes about resolution. He used phrases like structured accommodation and co-ownership framework. He suggested there were models in which a party holding significant leverage might be brought formally into the business rather than set against it. He said this twice. I let him finish. Then I said, "Mr. Vale, if you are still the most powerful person in this situation, why are you sitting in a restaurant asking me for help?" He had no answer. Not a word. He did not look like the man who had taken that ticket from my fingers. He looked small, and cold, and entirely alone in a room with a very fine view. The final hearing was set for the 3rd week of the following month. By the time it arrived, the legal landscape looked nothing like the night this had begun. Evelyn had filed the Lottery Commission's formal regulatory position as supporting documentation. She had submitted the metadata evidence from the settlement letter. She had obtained a signed witness statement from Cora confirming the existence and subsequent remote deletion of the surveillance footage. Ruth Baxter's photographs of both sides of the ticket had been entered as verified digital evidence, authenticated by an independent forensic technician. The Gilded Crown Group's legal team challenged every piece of it. They were thorough and expensive. They lost on every substantive point. The judge ruled in my favor. The lottery ticket, purchased during a verified unpaid break, held by me at the time of the draw, photographed in my possession before any ownership claim was made, was mine. The contract clause on page 86 was cited directly in the written judgment. I walked out of Hartfield Court into cold, bright morning air. At the bottom of the steps, a group of journalists had gathered. They were not filming me. They were filming Mr. Desmond Vale, who stood to one side of the entrance with 2 people carrying no cameras and showing him a document. I recognized the identification lanyards from the correspondence Evelyn had been receiving for 3 weeks. Federal compliance investigators. The Commission's referral had progressed considerably further than any of us had known. I walked past him without a word. 6 months later, I stood at the front of a converted warehouse on the south side of the city that we had spent 11 weeks renovating. The walls were freshly plastered, windows running floor to ceiling along one side, filling the space with more light than any building I had ever cleaned. We called the foundation the Fennec Trust, named for the road where Theo and I had sat up too many late nights trying to make the arithmetic of our lives add up, and for every road like it. Its purpose was direct: support for low-income hospitality workers and single parents facing workplace coercion or institutional abuse. Ruth Baxter ran community outreach, having quietly resigned from the Gilded Crown 6 months before I did without making any noise about it. Cora managed our evidence preservation services for workers who needed support before they could afford legal representation. Callum Vale funded the ethics training program for smaller hospitality businesses and kept his name out of every document. On the morning we opened, a young woman who cleaned a hotel 2 streets over hovered just inside the entrance with her coat still on. I was not sure, she said quietly, whether somewhere like this was for people like me. I opened the door a little wider. That, I said, is exactly why we built it. If this story reached something in you, share it with someone who needs it. Leave a comment telling me which moment stayed with you longest. Subscribe if you have not already. The table is bigger than they ever told you. It always was.